Hello and welcome to the seventh and final video on our series on monetary economies. In this video, we're going to discuss monetary neutrality, and it actually takes off exactly where we finished in the previous video. We saw that we could solve separately for the real variables and the nominal variables. That's going to lead to something we're going to call monetary neutrality, and that's the main result of this type of model. So let's get into it. What does it mean for money to be neutral? Well, it literally means that it has no real effects. It is neutral because its level has no effects on the economy. Only nominal variables move with money, but real variables just do not care. And the implication of neutrality is that we can just go ahead and solve all real variables separately from the nominal variables. We get the same equilibrium and the same solution as in our previous modules without having to take into account the nominal variables of the economy. And I just want to mention that we have actually seen this before. We just didn't give it a name back then. But if you remember the Mian and Sufi model, we were able to solve all relative prices and all real quantities before knowing the level of prices. And actually, the level of prices was only known once we knew the level of the nominal demand. Without the level of the nominal demand, prices were just left undefined except for the relative prices, which are real, and all the real quantities of the model. So we had actually seen already an example of a model where monetary neutrality was affecting it. And we also had an example in the search and matching model. Although we didn't have any nominal variable, it is also a case where we can figure out first what the ratios are, ratios like the market tightness, and then look at levels. So it's a very similar set of results of the ones we find here in money neutrality, where we can know what happens to relative prices, we can know what happens to real quantities without necessarily knowing what the level of money is. So to see exactly how money neutrality is going to work, we can follow the following experiment. Imagine that the money supply starts at some level m minus, that's the previous level of money supply. Everybody expects this to remain at that level. But then the government decides to increase the money supply. They want to print more money. So they want m to be greater than m minus. That means there is going to be more money in the economy. And this links back to our discussion on the government's budget. Basically, we're saying that this last term here, the change in the money supply, it's going to be positive. And the same as when we were discussing the government's budget, there are three things that the government can do with these additional nominal resources. They can decide to give it to households, so they can reduce nominal taxes or equivalently increase transfers. So that's going to be taking this additional money, sending it to transfers. Historically, that's an exercise, it's a thought experiment really. It has never been employed, but economists kind of jokingly refer to it as a helicopter money or helicopter drop, because it's basically saying that you're going to print the money and then you're going to give it to households, as if you were piloting a helicopter and then just throwing money from it. So that's kind of the first thing you could do. The second thing you could do is you could reduce the value of government bonds. This is an open market operation. We briefly mentioned this. So central banks, they often use this. When a central bank prints more money, they can buy government bonds. By buying government bonds, they exchange these assets for actual cash. And so that's another thing that can happen. You can buy government debt and replace it with cash. The final thing that can happen is you can increase nominal government spending. And that's actually something called seigniorage, where the government can use money that they print in order to finance current nominal spending. So the question is, what's going to happen? The key here is that all these three options are affecting nominal variables. You can give more nominal transfers, you can reduce nominal debt, or you can increase nominal spending. The question is going to be what happens to the real variables. And the answer is, because money is neutral, nothing is going to happen. The first two blocks here, these first two diagrams are exactly the same as before. The only change is that when the money supply goes up, then prices are going to adjust by exactly the same proportion, and they're going to go up in the same way. What that means is that inflation, the change in prices, is going to be equal to the rate of growth of money. prices are gonna adjust and nothing real is gonna happen. Let's go back for a moment. If prices are adjusting at the same rate as money is growing, then real transfers or taxes remain the same. It's just the nominal value of the taxes or transfers that changed. Real debt is going to remain the same. It's only the nominal debt that changed. And the same for government spending. The government is financing more nominal spending, but that additional government spending is not being reflected in more real spending. It's just a change in prices. That's what we learn from these three panels combined. Nothing real changes. You just get more money supply, prices are going to adjust. And so that's what's behind the result of money neutrality. The general equilibrium effect is not there. Nothing happens to variables. And the change in money supply just changes prices. In fact, M over P, that's the real quantity of money, that's the demand for real liquidity, does not change. And because M over P, the demand for real liquidity, does not change, you get this result that the change in M has to be equal to the change in P, the percentage change in M. So the money growth rate is the same as the growth rate of prices, so it's the same as inflation. So in the model, we can then just solve separately for real variables and nominal variables. And this is what's called the classical dichotomy. It's a dichotomy because you can separate the model into the real side and the nominal side and just study them separately. But we should ask ourselves at this point, and with this we're going to finish this on the next slide, is money really neutral? What's behind this result in the model? Well, it turns out that the key for money neutrality is that prices can change. That is why we think that money is actually neutral, but only in the long run. Let me go back a couple slides. The key here is that if prices can change from P1 to P2 and increase freely when the money supply increases, then prices can absorb the whole change in the market and nobody else has to adjust. The results will be quite different if prices were fixed. If you have fixed prices, then money can have real effects, just as in the Mian and Sufi model. If you remember, in the Mian and Sufi model, when prices are fixed, you get real effects in terms of how much unemployment there was when there was a change in the nominal demand. It's a very similar problem. The effect depends crucially on price flexibility. If prices are flexible, then changes in nominal variables are just independent of real variables. Real variables do not change, and only nominal variables are going to change. So with that, we finish this module. I greatly recommend that you read chapter 12, and if you're interested in to know more about fixed prices, I also recommend that you check the beginning of chapter 13. That's gonna also be very informative for you. With that, we are done. So thank you very much.